right, folks. Hey, thanks for coming. Appreciate you guys making it all the way over to this end of the exhibit hall, right? My goodness, we could have moved us closer, wouldn't we? My name is George Murphy. I lead the financial services practice for Salesforce.com in North America. Kent, as you see up there from Macquarie Capital or Macquarie Bank, he's going to be doing the heavy lifting today. I'm going to just introduce. My apologies for in the binder you just saw. There's an individual by the name of Bill Santo from Sanders Morris Harris Capital, SMH Capital. Couldn't make it today. I was excited on the way here. I was at 35,000 feet. I had Wi-Fi, and when you get an email from your speaker at 35,000 feet and the subject line is just Dreamforce, it's never a good thing. And I came down with swine flu and couldn't make it. Kent, the good news is Kent has a lot of material, and he's going to go through it in more detail, and you'll actually get more demo time rather than slides, which I think once you see what Kent has to show, you'll love it. So with that said, we're going to get into it. We're about 50 minutes of Kent's time. The overview that you were going to get from Bill Santo, that we're going to get him on a different session in the future, maybe like a community of practice or something along those lines. He's going to go through the mandate process by which, in the capital markets, whether it's a private or a public offering, going through the process of winning the mandate, sourcing the deal, and then going through and executing the deal either in the private market or the public market. So that he was just going to kind of walk through that in the application opportunities, standard capital raising practice. So with that said, that was that part, and then this was kind of going to be the compliance and risk mitigation part. But it's really solid material that I think you're going to see here from Ken without question. Before I do give it over to Ken, I'm going to have a shameless plug for my other session that is going on here at Dreamforce. So at 9 o'clock on Friday morning, some of these sessions start as early as 7:30. So 9 o'clock is actually not bad. Best practice from the buy side. It's in North 125. Jaron Joseph is actually in the back of the room. Jaron, I worked personally on this deal myself. I implemented it. It's RiverSource Distributors. It's a broker-dealer working that's inside of Ameriprise. So they distribute the asset management projects, the funds, the variable annuities, and the insurance products through a broker-dealer network. So it's a classic mutual fund wholesaling type model. So with that said, get out of bed on Friday, come on in, tell your friends, bring your family, and we'll see you on Friday at 9 for that session. It's an excellent session as well. And Nancy Van Buskam, who will be presenting, will be doing it for the hour as well. So you get a lot of demo, a lot of great integration, Informatica work there. So with that said, Kent, thanks so much for coming. Appreciate you coming all the way from Australia to do this for us today. And let's without further ado, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Let's see what these slides are. Do you need to talk to the safe harbor, or do I need to talk about it?
That's the safe harbor. And,
Next. Okay. All right. I'll give you a bit of background on myself and Macquarie Group in Australia. We are a financial services institutional bank. I'm part of the banking and financial services group. We look after the retail distribution side of the business. So we've got retail banking, we've got mortgages, premium funding, retail stockbroking, and a number of other activities. And what we have built, and what I'm going to show you here today, was a solution to a big problem, which was just too much paperwork, too much tracking in different systems and spreadsheets, all of our activities that are required under BAL 2 to track our op risk capital, as well as APRA requirements, which is the Australian regulator, Prudential Regulatory Authority. So what I hope for you to take away from this presentation is to get an insight into how Force.com can be used to standardize complex risk and compliance processes, understand how it can be used to analyze and audit those operational processes in an effort to actually bring your risk down. We also are aiming to gain insight into how best to report our operational risk and compliance metrics because we often have many different stakeholders who have different requirements. uncover risks and spot trends that we might not have seen previously. So the system allows us to see some forward indicators that might not have been obvious using an old system or spreadsheets. Deliver more accurate and detailed performance metrics using fewer people. So right up front, we identified that we could probably save about half an FTE just by getting rid of copying and pasting of the same information to different stakeholders at different points in the month. Significantly reduce the turnaround time. We have to log all errors or breaches and resolve those and report them within certain time frames. What we've built for ourselves is actually cut that resolution period down from, say, a month and a half to a couple of weeks. And also, it's minimize the impacts of operating in multiple time zones. I don't know how many of you might have staff on the other side of the world. We had 4 countries, the UK, Canada, Australia, and the USA. And when things were tracked in spreadsheets, I had to wait 24 hours before I got a response to the email I sent now. They were asleep, had to turn around overnight while I was in bed myself. So this is what we've accomplished with this solution. So I'll take you through a couple more slides, then we'll get into the demo. At the moment, just a couple of stats. We currently have 81 users. That's just in that banking and financial services group that I'm part of. We've had other groups in the bank who've expressed interest and now have approval to effectively clone or package up what we've built. And so we'll be assisting them with that. Overall, Macquarie's got about 800 users at the moment. We've built separate applications within Salesforce that help enable Chinese walls so we don't breach any of our prudential requirements there. We're starting to use more Apex Code, Conga Merge, and other add-ons to the out-of-the-box. Most of what you're going to see is actually just point and click. Standard configuration, business user, non-IT, and I built that with one of my colleagues who is meant to be in the room, but I think she might be trapped elsewhere. And what we're also starting to do is roll out Salesforce to Salesforce because we have similar needs across these Chinese walls, but we don't want to replicate the functionality individually in each org. So what we're starting to build are those connections where we can actually share the core functionality of the system while keeping the data separate. Okay. So again, just to recap, we were dealing with 4 countries at the time, and I just joined from another part of the group a year ago. I inherited this role, and we had hundreds of policies and regulations. At the time, there were about 250 complaints in the register, 300 operational risks, close to 700 controls, and that was all being managed in various spreadsheets, reports, audits, etc. So what Force.com has done is taken us from this to this. The elements are still the same, but now it's organized, and it's actually meaningful in how everything hangs together. Okay? So the functionality, just to recap before I go into the demo, we're using web-to-case management to log when something goes wrong, and then tracking that through the approvals and workflow. We're logging and assessing our operational risks and compliance, and then we're using controls to identify how we mitigate those risks and testing those controls. If you're from the US, you're probably familiar with the SOX regime. So in Australia, we call it ORSA, Operational Risk Self-Assessment. Very similar approach. You identify your risks, you apply your controls, you do testing. We also now are using it for reporting significant cash transactions to AUSTRAC. We were recently audited. We had some gaps. We came up with this new solution, which now ensures we don't have any more breaches in that reporting requirement. And then we're also using ideas actively to enhance the system and to apply some change management practices to how we're fleshing out our application. And I think that should be, demo.
In terms of questions, if you have something you really want to ask, go ahead and ask it. But if not, we're going to plow through the processes that he's built out, and we'll leave 10, 15 minutes at the end to take questions, okay?
Okay. So I'm not sure how many of you come from a risk and compliance background, but I've given this demo about a dozen times, and so I'm going to follow the general sort of script that I always follow for the internal people. From a risk and compliance perspective, one of our main functions is to deal with issues where things have gone wrong. So it might be a regulatory breach, it could be a complaint, it could be a breakdown of a process overnight. We've lumped all those into cases. So cases is one of the standard objects that we've used. And so what I'll do is I'll go into here and create a dummy case just so you can see. Now, this information can come to us in a number of ways. It can be a phone call, it could be an email. We've also created a web form on our intranet, which then pushes it straight to Salesforce. So rather than us getting an email, copying and pasting into the system, most of it will come straight into here into a queue. So what I'll do is create a new case. And as I mentioned, we've got different types of cases. I said not to show that anymore. We've got incidents, complaints, fraud, general queries. We maintain a gift register. So we just have a number of different things here. My team is called business banking, so you'll see lots of BB. That's to identify our record types, our layouts, our fields from the other divisions in my group who are also using the system. Okay? So I'll just create a new complaint, for example. Actually, I'll do an incident. So as I mentioned, a lot of this can come through our web form. I love using a new laptop when your settings aren't there. Okay. So we've set up different divisions, or sorry, entities. We've rebranded accounts to entities, because in a banking context, account means a check account, a savings account. So we've just relabeled the accounts tab as entities. So anywhere you see entities, that's what we are talking about there. So a key in the division that this particular incident has occurred in. I'll skip over the non-mandatory fields, but there's just general information about the location where something occurred. We'll put in what date it happened, what date we found out about it. Put in a subject. Let's pretend in this case it was a privacy breach. Every once in a while, I'm sure every company's had this, people send information outside that they shouldn't have. So that sort of incident we would log here. We would put in a description and then what caused the problem, what actually broke down. If there's any sort of financial exposure, we'll put that information in here as well. And then any non-financial impact. So was it a regulatory breach? Was it just an internal impact, et cetera? Then when it comes time to resolve it, we'll put the notes in here. I am called a BORM in Macquarie. That's Business Operational Risk Manager. So we have a whole section on most of our objects where we will assess what has occurred and try and link it to other things within the system. Try to build those relationships between things that used to live in separate spreadsheets or systems. So for right now, I'm just going to save this. Okay. So heavy use of traffic lights, which is fantastic because we have a high volume of things coming through. We can quickly see, glancing at a list view, what's out there for us to action. Because it's blue, it's not top priority. Something that's red obviously needs to be actioned straight away. In that BORM use only section, what I'll show you here, sorry, I should have done that. We can link it to what we call our ORSA, or our risks. So we've preloaded into the system, what are the key things that can go wrong in this business? So breach of privacy could be one of those things. So I will actually start typing breach of privacy, do the lookup. So this is what my team assesses when this breach has come through the system. And there we've got breach of privacy, but I need it for relationship banking. Oh, there it is. Okay. Select that. All right. I can also link it into a external regulation. So if I find that field, I can't see it. There it is. Related regulation. Okay. In Australia, it's called the Privacy Act. All right, 1988. Okay. So now when I save that, what we've now done is if somebody in our risk management group comes to me and says, tell me everything that's happened in your area related to privacy, I can go straight to the Privacy Act, or I can go to the privacy risk. I'm starting to create these links between different pieces of information. So what I'll do is I'll scroll down. The remainder of this process is to find out the details of what happened, resolve it, report it. We use workflow and email notifications within my team. If anything's over a certain threshold, say 20,000, there's a special email to escalate it to the board, et cetera. So pretty standard workflow processes. But what I want to show you now is if I link into the actual policy or act, in this case we have a synopsis of the Privacy Act for Australia. with some key points. We don't regurgitate the whole thing, obviously, but we have a link to the actual website where we can find additional information. If I scroll down the page here, you can start to see that snapshot of everything that's happening in the privacy space in my group. So we've got 2 risks here: breach of privacy and confidentiality. Active banking is a system where we've had an incident in the past. The controls around that, and you can see we've got a list of 8 controls. Again, you can see the different traffic lights there. Things that are amber needs improvement, generally speaking. Cases. So here I've got test privacy breach. Okay. So again, we start to build up a picture of what's happening in the business. In this particular example, a few months ago, we had several privacy breaches in the space of 2 months, and we decided we need to do some more privacy training. And so we've got links to our project list, and so we created a new project, which was Privacy Training Refresher. Okay? So we managed then our sort of value add activities in a compliance and risk perspective through this system. A couple things I want to point out here. In terms of prioritization, certain things are just more important for us to complete. Compliance projects, operational risk projects. If it's a business as usual or nice to have, our auto priority rules, we put those further down the list. So it very quickly tells us, and in this case it's complete, that it would actually have high if it's compliance related and the deadline's within a month, for example. So we'll use that to then allocate resources in my team to what's most important this week or this month. There's description information about the about the project, and again you can see links that we're starting to build between these different pieces of information. In the related list section, we can have some sub-projects, so a number of things are quite large, programs of work that will take months or years, and so we'll break that down into sub-projects. We manage our tasks through here. We use synchronization with Outlook, so we've got our open and closed activities. And then for the auditors, they love to see audit trail, so we have activity tracking, field changes at the bottom there. So right now, let's say I wanted to go into business banking again. So I'll go back to my case and relationship banking. So here's where I can get a snapshot of what's happening with this particular division. So I've got basic information about the business unit itself, the business head. So we put all staff into the system. We do a monthly upload from PeopleSoft so that we can have current information here. Any legal subsidiaries that have been set up for that entity. So we do corporate governance activities. We'll actually track, okay, who's the director on this particular entity? When is its financial year end? We do have a separate system in COSEC, which is Blueprint. Some of you may have heard of. It's quite widely used. We don't replicate that. We just want to have core information here that we need to properly manage our operational risk. We've got all the contacts, which are staff. Cases, as I mentioned, are things that have gone wrong that we're actioning. The whole list of risks. So we've got more than 50 here for MRB. This is a 6-monthly process where we identify what can go wrong, what controls are applied to that. But we now maintain this on a daily basis because every time a case comes up, we link it straight to a risk that's previously been identified. If there isn't a risk, if it's something that's completely left field, we'll create a new risk at that stage. And then that feeds into our 6-monthly ORSA process. The controls I've touched on. All the projects that are touching that division, again, activities, activity history. We're using some notes and attachments, not a lot. I'm very excited about the content stuff we saw today. So we'll probably use a bit more of that going forward. Under the individual contacts, so I'll go back up to, say, Peter Jones, who heads up that business. We're starting to do some tracking from an AML perspective as well. So there are key risk roles, people within the organization who have to have certain levels of anti-money laundering training. They have to take 2 weeks annual leave, and we check their work while they're away, that sort of thing. So we track that in here. And what we'll be doing is loading up system access reports. If somebody's been gone for 2 weeks, and they're not meant to log into the system, and we load up the report, and lo and behold, they have logged in, we'll then look into why that is. That was it on that. Now, I've touched on projects. I'll go back to the division here. I mentioned ORSA a couple of times. This is a massive report that goes to our regulator, APRA. And using Conga Merge, we've actually built a number of formatted reports. We like the reporting, and I'm very excited about the new reporting that's coming out next year. But we found, from a formatting perspective, Conga really delivered something a bit more special for us. So while that's loading here, we, as I mentioned, we've got many different stakeholders, so we'll provide these reports to the regulator as well as our internal audit division, et cetera. And as soon as this launches, all right, so here's a critical controls report. And through this whole system, we also have to do testing, as I mentioned, or we've called it assurance within Macquarie. So here in the middle columns, you can see we're tracking on our individual controls what testing have we done to verify that these particular controls are happening on a regular basis, and then what the ratings are. So that's a straightforward Conga Merge that we're using there. Okay. Dashboards and reports we absolutely love. They're fantastic. When we first started building this application, and we just built it January this year, it was 2 of us, non-IT people, and we had 80% of what we wanted in about 3 weeks. So it's just been a process of refinement since then. And in terms of scope, it's actually probably gone from this big to that big. We're doing a lot more with it than we ever envisaged, and we're getting a lot of ideas from people as they start to use it. And as I mentioned, we use the Ideas tab. So here's a nice dashboard. I can see very quickly, we're still in the green from a compliance perspective. So we've defined, I think it's about 15 or 20 key risk indicators. If we've gone past due on too many activities, if we've not responded to a complaint within a certain period of time, they're all negative marks against us. And that would push us up into the red on the gauge over here. So I can very quickly see, how are we tracking on our activities that are key from a regulatory perspective? Okay. So we have a number of things on here. We track complaints we have to acknowledge within 5 days. They have to be resolved within 45. We look at the number of complaints over the last 90 days. We've got our compliance resourcing. The regulators love to see that we have people working on compliance activities. So here I can say within my group, we've got however many people that is, 7 in my team, 4 in North America, 1 in the US, and 13 in banking, working on risk and compliance activities. We also have a top 10 list, which is obviously more than 10 in this case, but where are we spending our time on various activities? So AML is a hot topic in Australia at the moment, so we've got 8 separate activities or projects that touch on AML. Okay. We've done a number of different dashboards. This one's compliance related. We also have key risk dashboards. And that will look at how many new cases or incidents have we logged over the last week, have we put new risks in the system, new controls, et cetera. Okay. And you're probably all very familiar. You can click through to the reports, et cetera. So this whole functionality, we produce a pack. It's probably about 1.5 inches thick for management of my group every month, which used to take me probably about 3 days on my own to just produce that report. It's now done in about 2 hours. So it's mostly point and click using dashboards, copy the picture, so just right-click over the image itself of the chart and paste that into a document. So made my life so much easier. One of the other things we're starting to use the system for is assurance, I mentioned. So that's actually testing what's actually happening. So we use this for file audits, for example. So if I'm going into our premium funding area and I need to check that they're actually following the procedures, because it's a fairly manual process, I can go in here and say, okay, what sort of loan file am I looking at? Is it a new deal? Yes, I'll take that. I then have a nice little checklist. So as I'm going through on one monitor, the scanned loan file documents, and I have Salesforce open on the other monitor because we all have 2 screens, I can then, checking that off, fill in here, was the checklist okay? Yes. Did client services sign off? Yes, et cetera. So we can go through 100 files quite quickly and instantly have our report, how are we tracking, and compare that to 6 months ago. So that used to be done manually on a piece of paper. Somebody would then key it into an Excel spreadsheet, and then somebody would spend a couple of days building a chart. So we can now do that the reporting element in about 5 minutes. I mentioned earlier on that we're also using it for cash reporting, and I mentioned we have a number of different applications as well. So I wouldn't normally use this one. This is normally in our branches. Because we're an investment bank, we only have 3 branch offices, and we don't have tellers per se, okay? We do offer some niche banking services for some businesses, and one core industry that we service is real estate agents. They accept a lot of cash for rental payments, and will often go over that $10,000 threshold when they come in to make a deposit. We haven't invested in an online teller system for 50 transactions a day. It's not worth it. So what we've done is we've created a teller system using our version of Salesforce, which we've called Radar, which is Radar Cash. So now when a real estate agent comes in, they're making a deposit, and there's more than $10,000 in cash, they can go in here, and actually they use it for all cash transactions, even if it's only $5. They put in the dollar amounts based on the denomination and the coins. Let me actually create one here for more than $10,000. Most of it comes in via secured courier, yeah, but you'd be surprised they come in with $60,000 in cash for the week's rent takings. But anyway, so they come in. Let's say there's $15,000, so that will definitely put us over. That's 150, I think. And I said we love using traffic lights. So immediately says I need to add identification details because this will have to be reported to OzTrack. So we then have more sections appear where I can actually capture that. And we've preloaded our customer names, account numbers, and addresses. So in most cases, there would be an address here. You would simply say to the person standing in front of you, is your office still at this location? Yep. Capture their driver's license number, and then submit that. So what we've also done is we've created some cash vouchers or cash in, cash out slips that we can run through the printer. So they would then, after they capture the details, print the cash vouchers. They used to manually fill those out from a cash book that had carbonless copies. Once they've done that, they then click Send to BORM, which is my team, and BORM team notified. That goes into our queue. We then can produce a printed PDF of the actual currency transaction report. It creates an XML file that we upload directly via FTP to OzTrack. And the entire process has gone from about 20 to 25 minutes per transaction, because they used to do it manually, to 3 minutes. And we've eliminated all potential, forgetting to lodge this thing, because the system automatically sends it to us, so we know to lodge it. So it's really increased our regulatory compliance, and our risk management group absolutely loves it.
Compliance. Major compliance? No compliance?
No.
This stuff, I mean, the folks that are in compliance, they eat this stuff up. They just love it. The regulators come in, in our side, the NASD,
Yeah.
SEC, in the States, be able to do this. And the other individual that we're going to Bill Santo, who is going to speak as well, he saw this. He's going to be implementing it. It's kind of nice when you meet people, share podium. They're going to be implementing this. If we were to put this on the App Exchange, how many would you think you might download it and use it in your bank? Yeah,
3.
There's a few.
I will just show you a couple more things. I'll go back to my version of Radar. And we decided to call it something other than Salesforce, because when you say sales and risk and compliance, people are like, two don't make sense. And it was actually a bit of a dig to an internal system called Sonar, and ours is far better, so we called it Radar. But anyway, I did mention we use... Oh, that could be, yes. Yeah. In fact, that risk management group has been doing a proof of concept to replace Sonar with what we've built here, which cost them over $1 million. So anyway, we do use ideas as well, and this is where most of our enhancements come from. It's an ongoing process. We have somebody who spends most of his time just building out additional functionality in the system for us. We've literally eliminated hundreds of spreadsheets with this system. And we now get the sort of comments from our risk management group. They send us an email saying, we need the following such and such report. What used to take 3 days to get back to them will now get back to them in 20 minutes. They're like, how the heck did you do that? So really has made our lives much, much easier. That was all my formal demo. Is there any questions?
Let's just, anybody have any questions? And then I think some approval processes and workflow, maybe we can get into in a bit here too, some of that. Any questions on this, please?
Have you actually managed to decommission some of those other systems as well? Because you talked about the half FTE, some of the time spent that you're able to reduce, which is all adding to your ROI. Have you been able to decommission the other systems?
The question, if you couldn't hear, is have we been able to decommission any other systems because of this? At the moment, well, I mean, we've certainly eliminated hundreds of spreadsheets that we used to maintain on an ongoing basis, so that's gone. There are other systems where we have the option to use it or not, and for many of those, we've now chosen not to use those other systems because we have this. There is one system where we have to load significant incidents, so things over, say, $100,000. We still have to use that system, but we figure the copy and pasting effort to load it into that system is worth the added benefit that we're getting out of what we've built here. And in fact, the area that owns that system has acknowledged that given half the bank's likely to be on this in the next 6 months, they have to facilitate an automatic link between the two. So what we've built is actually driving change in terms of interfaces to systems that previously nobody ever wanted to interface with.
What about security and visibility? The Chinese walls is a big thing in banking.
Yeah, I mean, for example, here up in the top right corner, I've got access to the cash desk. We switched it on for this demo, but I don't normally have access to that, so our system admin had to do that. We currently have 3 different areas in my group using Radar, and through the use of roles, profiles, and separate applications, we can actually ensure Chinese walls are maintained. So even though we'll share the same fields, we share some page layouts, I can't see any of their data and vice versa because of the use of profiles and separate applications.
Right.
What's your corp governance section? Compliance is a regulatory piece.
Yeah, corp governance. This is where we're tracking those legal entities, as I mentioned. So if I wanted to look at this particular subsidiary, it is just a snapshot of some of the key information. We don't use it a lot, to be honest, because it does double up another system that our company secretarial uses called Blueprint that I mentioned earlier. But we had some issues where there were some filings missed, and so management said, I really want to know what filings are coming up. And so we're able to now flag that to management because we've captured some of those details here. But if they wanted to change directors, for example, in that entity, they wouldn't come to us. They'd go to company secretary in another part of the bank. Any other questions?
So you mentioned that you were going to carbon copy this across the other divisions.
Yep.
If people don't know Macquarie as well as perhaps local people know that it's very, very segregated and departmental organisation.
Yep.
Is risk management group worried about you creating data silos?
The question is our risk management group concerned about us creating data silos by cloning the system and setting up separate instances or orgs for each of the groups? They're not concerned because we've done a proof of concept on using Salesforce to Salesforce. So things like risks and controls, from their point of view in the risk management group, we have one library of controls, one library of risks. That may change slightly over time, but at the end of the day, we've got similar sort of risks across the organization. So using Salesforce to Salesforce, they will control those sort of core risks, those core controls. We can add other fields and track what we want to, but they'll basically push that down through Salesforce to each of the orgs that are linked into theirs. Any other questions? Yeah.
And obviously you're very, you're not afraid to try something new in the system.
Mm-hmm.
Because the executive, when you change, what would you be advised for the other executives who are not necessarily familiar with Salesforce or they don't want to spend 2 weeks to build up 80% functionality? What would you?
Yeah, the question was, how would we convince executives who might be a bit more hesitant about trying something like this. I'm quite lucky that my immediate boss, who's the head of my part of BFS, is quite open to change. And so when I said to him, I've been thinking about this for a year, I've seen us use it in other parts of the business, can I do this? And he said, yeah, go for it. Not everybody has that luxury. But what I then did is, because I could configure it, and we used a slow period over Christmas, New Year in Australia. If any of you have been there, the place kind of shuts down. Everyone goes to the beach. So we basically just used that period to build what we wanted. And then it was demo, demo, demo. I've shown this thing probably about, well, between me and my team, probably about 50 times. And all the senior executives love it. And we're now talking about packaging it up and selling it on AppExchange. And as soon as the head of my group heard that, he said, great, you're going to be a profit center. I'm all for it. So compliance is now going to make money instead of spending it.
Yeah, and I would second that, Kent. You know, I didn't give you my background. I spent 8 years at Morgan Stanley in private wealth management and investment management, in the business, running projects and doing analytics and presenting this kind of stuff to the senior management, presidents, chief operating officers, that kind of stuff. And then I left to start a company, a subsidiary organization for a real estate firm, a broker-dealer, to distribute REITs. And it's about leadership. I ran the technology and all the projects, and the leader said, here's the budget, here's the portfolio, run with it. I think that's what it's all about. I got more done in 16 months building out the company than I got done in 8 years at Morgan Stanley. And it was much more fun. It's about leadership. It's about empowerment.
This may be out of your purview. What about credit risk or market risk? Have you designed anything to match credit risk, exposure, et cetera, through this?
Yep. The question is, what about credit risk or market risk? We do have a team, BFS Credit, who, they've got a delegation from the Central Risk Management Group for overseeing credit within my group. They're currently piloting. They're using a version of this in a sandbox, and so we're currently configuring that for them. So they are going to be using it for monitoring irregulars, as well as doing file reviews, looking at some client exposure. We do have some Central Risk Management Group systems, the limits system, the ratings system that we have to feed into. So we haven't taken that next step to look at, okay, how would we interface with that? But there has been some movement in that area, but we're not using it completely yet. From a market risk perspective, we've just recently announced that we're acquiring a retail broker in Canada, Blackmont Capital, and we're currently configuring this to monitor their market exposure, because they carry, as principal, some investments to help facilitate trade with their clients. And we'll be doing that in here probably as well. So we're getting there. But it is primarily operational risk and compliance at this stage. Yep, please.
Could you comment on the savings, cost savings, people savings in terms of where you've been and where you're now?
Yeah. The question was, can we quantify the savings? When I got that approval and I said, okay, I can build this quickly, we then went back and we did those demos to the senior management. I did have to put up a bit of a business case, and so we were able to demonstrate in a team of 4 people, we actually saved half of a person just on eliminating the duplicate reporting. So that was on a team of 4. We're now a team of 9, and that's just in my team. We've got 81 users, so if we kind of extrapolate that out, we haven't gone that sort of next step. But I think what management recognizes is not necessarily the cost savings, but the cost avoidance of a regulatory breach. In Australia, if we breach anti-money laundering requirements, we can get an $11 million fine. So they see this as a good value if we avoid missing a cash transaction report. Plus the hundreds of spreadsheets, yeah. And our risk management group hates spreadsheets, so I always, when they talk about how we've put a lot of reliance on the system, it's hosted externally, I say, but I've eliminated the hundreds of spreadsheets that you guys don't like.
Could you pull up the field tracking history as well? This is something I think is really important. This is a feature we didn't have a year ago, but we're allowed, per object, you can have 20 fields that you can track historical. What was the data value before? What is it now? Who changed it? When did they change it? That is, I think, really critical in compliance to be able to see this stuff. You can't, when you have spreadsheets, you know, tracking the versions of spreadsheets, not possible. We have field level, you know, security. So you can go security down to the field level. You know who changed it, you know when. We have encryption at the field level. If you put credit cards out here, social security numbers out here, encrypted at the field level. So it's about risk and risk, you know, really risk avoidance.
I love the idea about monitoring people on holidays and actually work.
Mm-hmm.
I wish we were doing sales business more often.
What was that?
Yeah, I understand. So
Okay.
are you scanning the logs to now to sales application, or you're locking their accounts?
The question was, how are we actually tracking whether people logged in when they're on annual leave, if they're a key risk role and they're not meant to log in for 2 weeks? We haven't implemented it yet, to be honest. So we're currently coordinating with our IT group, ITG, to get the right report to then use Excel Loader or whatever to get it in efficiently. But basically, there is a report that they can provide us, which will flag if somebody was logged in that 2-week period. So we'll just have the system tell us, here's when they're booked in for leave through the HR upload. We'll have the IT upload, and it will immediately flag, well, this person logged in when they were away. So then we can look into it.
Non-internal stuff, like checking Salesforce login history for your stuff?
Not at the moment. Not at the moment. So we're more concerned about people moving money or moving securities. So that's going to be our first area of focus. So, I mean, we do have quite a robust user access review program across all key systems in the bank, and Salesforce is on the list. But it's certainly not sort of top tier where we focus most of our attention. That's on the transactional side. Yeah.
Please, let's just get one back here, please.
What is your approach for managing data quality? Do you focus more on training of the users to make sure that they're choosing the right actions on the list? Do you more reflection?
Yeah. The question is, how do we ensure data quality, and what approach do we use? We've taken a fairly restrictive approach in terms of who we give access to the system. So it is really just the risk and compliance teams, a few of the legal people, the credit people I mentioned. Because I want to be able to run a report out of here and have confidence I don't have to rewrite something before it goes to APRA or AUSTRAC, that's why we've limited access to it. And that's why we're using a lot of web forms to first capture the information from our intranet, pass it through, we'll edit it, make sure it reads correctly, there's no typos, et cetera. There are 2 schools of thought in Macquarie. Our risk management group wants to push it out to everybody. And so they then see Salesforce as quite cost prohibitive because the licenses we're using, unlimited edition, are quite high. But from my point of view, if I'm the one who's signing off saying that this is accurate, I'd rather write it myself up front, make sure it's clean, and not worry about it when I go to report later. So that's the approach we've taken, is we keep it locked down. The people in my team all know that they need to be quite good. We also use a roster system. So if there are cases that come into a queue, and so this particular week we haven't updated the dates, Andrew was the primary, and then Colin was reviewing his work. So we are having 2 people review everything before it's closed off from the system and reported. So just pure checking.
And we have ways around that licensing cost issue. We have, Force.com licenses are not full CRM licenses.
Yeah, we're looking at sites and portals as well, because we have a lot of external recipients of actions or responses, and so we're investigating that. Yeah, because we definitely want to roll it out to more people, but at the end of the day, I want to make sure that data is correct. Yeah.
Has there been interest in, because it seems like so many of the components you build here would also apply to share trade approval request management. So where you're managing institutional clients, M&A activity, and you're trying to manage blacklists and share trades that internal employees can't access. Yeah. If you actually do roll it out to the portal users, has there been interest to look at extending this out to do share trade tracking?
The question was, have we looked at rolling this out for share trade tracking and approvals? We haven't, because we actually have a fairly robust system internally for that. So there hasn't been much of a demand, and that seems to work pretty well. I mean, it's completely separate and unintegrated, so we may find at some point we do want to do that, but at the moment it's not on the list. But I don't see why we couldn't do it. Any other questions?
Any questions we have? So on the data one, we have something called the data loader. I mean, how many of you are familiar with the data loader? You can move data. It's like, how many of you are technical? Show my hands, like technical. So it's the extraction and the loading, the ETL without the transformation, right? Just extract data, load it, move it back and forth. You can schedule it. So we do a lot of that work to keep the data moving around.
Actually, there was something I skipped over, unfortunately, and we're quite proud of this, so let me go into it and show you. Under the risks and controls, I mentioned the 6-monthly process where we review what risks we have and what controls are in place. The previous process was you sit down with the business and you brainstorm what could go wrong, and you assign a rating. You know, how likely could it happen? Yep. And there's a scale there. How big would the financial impact be if it actually happened? There's a scale there. And you basically would come up with 2 ratings. What's the inherent rating? So if you had no controls at all, how big of an impact would it be? And then a residual value, which was, okay, assuming everything in place that we have to control this risk is working, what's our biggest exposure? That was completely divorced from the tracking of our actual breakdowns because they're 2 different systems. And so what this has done is brought those 2 things together. And so in this particular case, we thought that our residual score on privacy breaches was a 6. Well, we've got the system tracking on a rolling 12-month basis, which is the scoring period for those ratings. And it actually says our proper rating, well, on likelihood is a 4, where we've previously assumed a 3. So immediately the system's starting to tell us you're underestimating how much your risk is based on your actual experience with breakdowns.
And what was this process before? You had a specific process in which the managers gave you how many?
Stand at a whiteboard. What could go wrong? Write it down. How big do you think it is?
Yep. And now you have them.
Now we have actual data.
Yep.
And you'll see a couple errors there because we haven't put in the data. We've literally put in these fields in the last 24 hours. We can now put in a budget figure as well, and so we can track financially. We thought it would be a 2, which is 1 to 5% of budget. And it'll now tell us if we've exceeded that once we feed in those budget figures.
These are just formula fields on the platform, cross-object formula fields we have, so you don't need the Excel functionality anymore. Please, let's go here. Please.
Did you say you designed this in 2 weeks? Came up with
I've been thinking about I've been thinking about it for about a year. So I'd been working with the business using Salesforce for CRM and for tracking investors and that sort of thing. And it became clear to me over that period I could use this for risk and compliance activities. And it was only when I moved into a role where I suddenly had full ownership of that process and I inherited all these spreadsheets and other systems, I said, I'm a team of 1. I can't do this on my own. And so that's when I went to my boss and I said, I could build something that will make my life easier and will lower our risk, increase our controls, et cetera. And so had a very clear picture of what I wanted. And yeah, we had 80% within 2 weeks, really. It took us 2 months to tweak it, make sure everything worked, and then it's just been evolving ever since. And really no IT support at all. It's all been driven by the business, myself and Carmina, who's now sitting in the back of us here. So.
My question was going to be on that side. How has that changed now that you've expanded out to such a broad user group and expanding beyond that? What's IT's role now?
Yeah, the question is what is IT's role now? IT recently came to me with a draft presentation that was going to go up to exec saying how they needed to support Salesforce. And I sat next to the head of our IT in Toronto last week. We were both over there for a deal. We were having dinner and we were talking about this presentation. He's like, that's so fantastic. Let me know what I can do to get this up on AppExchange. So IT, who previously didn't really want anything to do with it, now are embracing it and actually see the value. And in fact, their risk people embedded in IT are next in line to get this.
Typically from as I mentioned at the outset, I'm in professional services, so we scope projects all the time. Typically on average, just to give you an estimate, these projects in financial services run on average 8 weeks. It's about, we have a 6-phase methodology. We plan the project, we analyze the requirements, we design a solution, we build it, we validate it, we deploy it. And that's typically that phase. We take about 8 weeks. So I think that what you probably did is more, it was in your head.
Yeah.
You just plan and analyze was kind of done.
Yeah.
So design and build is what he's talking about, really.
And I had been to admin training, so I was able to very quickly execute what was in my mind. Carmina had never seen Salesforce, so it was a bit of learning on the job, and both of us working it out. So we have used some Apex code, thanks to Sai in the front row here, who's helped us with some of our roll-ups. But really, it has just been point-and-click configuration.
And typically, when you start a project like this, you find I put changes, and, really the technology in terms of what's IT's involvement. I get that question a lot. I put them in 3 buckets. There's the configuration, the point-click declarative in the admin console. That's bucket 1. That's typically a business function. They can put fields on, they can change the page layouts, they can change the UI. Then the other extreme is if you have integration, where you have jobs that are written in ETL tools, or you're doing a lot of extraction and transformation and loading of data in PeopleSoft, Nightly, and Bash. That's an IT function. Then there's this gray area. And that's where we have, we have code on the platform. So, sometimes folks will go out and learn how to write Apex, and that kind of goes into that middle bucket where you need to partner with IT. You need to have center of excellence. You need to have controls in place. You need to review and make sure that you're not breaking any of that code. Because if you change a field in bucket 1 and it's integrated and it's looking for a pick list of values and they're not there, you're going to break, you're going to cause some problems. So it's typically, we recommend put a center of excellence in place, business and IT on that committee. They work together. This bucket 1, business, fine, go ahead. But the other stuff, we really got to review and push it through.
The question was, do we use ideas for change management? Yeah, we've also set up a custom object called changes. So when an idea is submitted, we have the status where it's not started, for example. When that's sort of reviewed and accepted as something we want to do, we change that to in progress, and that then effectively moves it to our changes log. So if I go into there, and I'll do all open. And we're using some little graphics there to also indicate, which go with the status. So in this case, assessed. Here, approved. So yay. And then once it's actually released, this all happened when I was in Toronto. I don't know where they came from. We've got the little muscle man here. He's actually finished it. So yeah, that's how we're managing our changes in the system. And we're applying project management methodologies for segregation of duties. We do it in a sandbox. There's review before it goes into production, et cetera. They haven't seen those, but I don't think they'd care about this part of the system, to be honest. So as long as we've got our risks and controls, they don't care about stick people.
One thing that Bill, that couldn't make it today, mentioned to me was he uses the system for compliance, risk, and controls as well. And he said when the SEC comes in for their audit, he sits down with them, come right in my office, opens up Salesforce, shows them the field tracking history, the approval processes, how the workflow works, who approved it when, looking at the field of information. They turn around, they walk away. He said, that's my experience, was that SEC can come in and make your life miserable domestically, right? So this is really important to keep your folks focused on business.
Any other questions? No? Okay.
Was there anything like workflow? I think you had some workflow.
Oh, yeah, we are using workflow
see a couple.
In cases. So
you just get like 5 minutes left.
Let me find a closed incident.
Did they mention content is now available for everybody? Was that the announcement today? Free? Unbelievable.
Let me go to one that's more recent. Here, if I just scroll down. There we go.
Sure. How many of you work for investment banks? You got a few. What about commercial? Just retail finance? Whether it be retail banking or credit cards or something like that.
Here we are in our cases. So we're using approval for cases. As I mentioned, we've got the two people on the roster at any one time, the primary and the secondary. So they're reviewing what's happening. You can see we've got some custom buttons here assigned to me and submit for approval. So when it comes into the queue from the web form, it just goes straight into the queue, and then that needs to be picked up by whoever's on the roster as primary that week. And so they'll click the Assign to Me button, changes the ownership to them. They then have responsibility for following that through and closing it out. When they have all the details and they feel it's in a state that it can be reported and closed out, they click Submit for approval. It locks the record. That then goes to the person who's on duty for reviewing. And in this case, I approved this one on the 13th of November. And the way we find out about that is we have the email notifications that come out, nice pretty HTML format. You can see it comes from Radar. And it also then appears in the Items to Approve on the Home tab. So we're using that for cases at the moment, and we're planning on using that as well for risks and controls. So if we put in a new risk, or if we need to amend a risk and it's become a bigger risk, for example, we want to put some approvals around that so we have visibility. And one of the things that I was excited about in the keynote today was we can get rid of a bunch of email notifications by using feeds. So very excited about the collaboration stuff, Chatter, because that's going to make our lives much easier and eliminate some back-end admin work.
Could you show the Visio on that, the read-only Visio on the approval?
Sorry?
Okay, forget it. So there's something we actually have, these approval processes. It creates a Visio read-only in the application. So what we're working on, again, Safe Harbor, what we're working on is actually taking the Visio and moving.
Is it under approval processes?
Yeah, approval processes. And you just go to scroll down there.
See, my system admin person does this.
Yeah, I don't see.
Yeah, I don't see it.
Yeah, change the cases. You're in the.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Sorry. There we go.
Go into your case approval process. Just click through it.
Case approval. Here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
View diagram.
View diagram. So this is kind of cool because this is what the regulators and business folks like. They actually see the workflow. What is the flow of the approval? This is read only now. It will be editable in a future release in the next release or two. And we're also going to apply this to workflow. This only applies to approval processes in the system, but it'll apply to workflow, and it'll be editable as well. So you can just drag and drop your Visio flow around. You don't have to actually go in and know how to step 1, step 2, step 3. It's just declarative, visual, drag, drop. There's your process. Submit. It creates all the workflow for you. It's cool. We're Fish. What are we on that? I think that's the product roadmap for workflow being editable through the Visio. Next to 2. Yeah, Safe Harbor, of course. Like next 6 to 9 months, something like that. But it's a priority for us because I mean this is really cool. This is really easy. The regulator sees this stuff. Okay, cool. You got it. Right. Okay. Any other questions? I'm going to give you 90 seconds back in your day. Oh, please, go.
Yeah.
You mentioned sales to the company and maybe what you'd like to improve in the future.
Yeah. The question is, what have I found to work well in working with Salesforce and changes for the future? The team that I've dealt with has been fantastic. They're Sydney-based. Because we're on Unlimited Edition, we've got premium support. They've been very responsive. Because what we're doing from a technical point of view is quite simple, but the final package is quite complex in terms of how it brings together all the stuff that used to live in different places. Because it is quite simple, we haven't had to call on them too much. But when they have provided some services like the proof of concept for Salesforce to Salesforce, very happy. No issues with that whatsoever. So, and the flexibility on we reached our limit on sandboxes. We needed another sandbox temporarily. Very happy to help us out for a short period of time. Got us past our issue, et cetera. So, yeah, no complaints at all.
One last shameless plug. 9 a.m. Friday. Best practice in the buy side. It was my project. It's huge. A lot of integration, Informatica, integration to the call center. All this call stats are in the application. Integration to the transfer agent, pulls in all the sales transactions, activity management, email dashboards, literature fulfillment integration, merchandise fulfillment integration. It's the classic wholesaling model, completely automated on the platform. We did it in 5 months. It's a stellar project. The business lead will actually present 9 a.m. Friday. You're going to love it. Thanks for coming, folks.
Thank you.